Good morning and a warm welcome to the Simply Divine programme. I'm Maria Colfer and you're tuned to Southeast Radio. Many years ago, there was a Church of Ireland minister living near us. His name was Canon Ernest Brandon. And around this time of the year, he used to organise a special weekend with talks on scripture and people telling their own life story and how they came from perhaps a life which took no account of God to changing their lives completely and making God the centre of their lives. Well, Canon Brandon has gone to his eternal reward and those weekends no longer happen. However, in the studio this morning is a man who's had a life-changing experience and is going to talk to us about his story. His name is David Hennessy. Good morning, David, and thank you for joining us this morning.
Good morning, Maria.
David, take us on an excursion of your life, what it was and what it became.
Well, I think I'd sum it up by saying that I was brought up in a good Catholic family near New Ross and had a very happy childhood, lovely family, lovely mother and father, brothers. But I emigrated in my 20s, and when I emigrated, I lost the faith.
Where did you
very
head
quickly to Mexico.
Right.
And it's a long story how I got there. It's an interesting story, and I went through several very interesting, fabulous jobs. But I finished up with a business of my own, and the centre of my life actually became me. And my aim was to make money, and lots of it. And when you sort of put God aside, which I did, I actually forgot all about him and stopped praying, stopped going to confession, stopped going to Mass, and got to the stage actually where I'd stopped believing in God. And I had the idea that, well, okay, when you die, you're just like a dog.
That's the end of it.
That's the end of it. But God is very good, and he doesn't let us get too far, or if we do get too far, he brings us back. And
can I just pause you there
yeah.
now? What was your business? What did you work at?
I was a real estate developer, but before that I had another business, but I got into real estate development in the 80s and was doing very well in Mexico City. And when things began to go downhill in Mexico City with the situation of crime and stuff like that, I took my family to Cancun, which is in the Caribbean. And actually the big thing that happened in my life was a hurricane, Hurricane Gilbert, which was 1988. Winds at 270 miles an hour. The barometer dropped to the floor, basically. It was quite terrifying. We lived near the sea, and we had to take refuge in a friend's house in the town, in Cancun town, which is on the mainland. And it was, I remember very well during the night looking out the window. We couldn't sleep, and our ears were popping. And looking out and seeing trees breaking in two, and the top part of the tree would fly through the air. And air conditioning units flying out of windows. It was amazing. It was like a Savage Express train whistling all night. It was quite amazing. So the next day, well, after when we got the all clear that we could leave and the centre of the hurricane had gone and the hurricane had effectively gone, we came out, and I remember looking up and down the main street of Cancun and seeing the trees and the posts and everything lying around, windows shattered. A scene of devastation. And I said, I'm finished. And that was it. I was finished in the sense that I was building a housing project on the ocean, right on the ocean. I had managed to buy a nice strip of land on the ocean with a partner and had put an investment project together. We were building a complex of houses there for tourists. And the hurricane went right through there. Now, we couldn't get there. I couldn't get down there for days. Couldn't get back to our house, in fact, for 2 days, and down to the project for about 3 or 4 days. But when we got there, I found it was chaos. Now, the houses were still standing because they were well built, but the installations and the whole infrastructure was ruined. But what most happened was the market was ruined. The real estate market, the bottom fell out of it completely. As Cancun was a new place, a lot of people left. A lot of people went back to Mexico City or to Monterrey, wherever they were from. And I was left with a lot of debts. And the banks called in loans, and 1 or 2 partners who wanted their money back quickly. But there was no way of getting it back to them. So I found myself really in a terribly, terribly tight situation. And as basically I was the centre of my existence, I never thought of God at all. And I'd done very well. I'd prospered, thank God. But I didn't thank God. I thought it was all due to that I was brilliant and good and on the ball and smart and had a solution for everything. So actually I was really hit very hard by this, and my children used to say to me, "Dad, speak up. Can't hear you, Dad, will you speak up?" I was into playing a lot of tennis, running, and I just couldn't. I got fatigued, couldn't do anything. I was very, very depressed, and this went on for a long time. And until about over a year later, I was struggling to get things together again, all sorts of different situations going on in my life. Marriage on the rocks. My daughter had to have an operation, an enormous operation. And as she has cerebral palsy, she couldn't, the insurance company wouldn't cover her. She had an enormous operation which cost an awful lot. And for 2 years, we didn't have any income at all whatsoever. So obviously my resources were running out, had to sell property. And but in all this time, Maria, I didn't think of God at all. Never thought of God, never prayed. But in 1989, I think it was 89, one of my brothers came out from Ireland. And after 2 or 3 days, he said, "David, you're not the same. You're not full of bounce as you always are. What's the matter?" And I didn't want to admit that this successful emigrant was no longer successful. And he said, "Well, tell me." So I told him, "Have you a beer? I remember looking at the ocean, having a beer together. And the lovely peace of the ocean, everything certainly didn't correspond to what was in me. I certainly was not at peace. I had basically believed that happiness and peace comes from a great combination of exercise, sex. I didn't have any care for the commandments at all. And money and image and being somebody." So he said something to me that actually annoyed me, because I didn't want to know anything about religion. I didn't want to know anything about God. There happened to be 2 Irish priests there in Cancun. When I used to see them coming across to the other side of the street, I don't know, I'd got so far away from the idea of praying or religion that I didn't want anything to do with the church at all. And my brother said to me, he said something that I said, "Wow, what's this?" He said, "Could I pray with you?" Well, I didn't want to know anything about prayer, but here he'd come across the Atlantic to see me, and he had said, "Look, I felt there was something wrong, and I came to help you." So what could I say? I said to myself, "Well, it won't do me any harm." And to him I said, "Okay." So the next day we went down to the project and we sat there, and he put his hand on me like that, and he started praying. But he was speaking to somebody who, for him, was in front of him. He spoke to Jesus Christ. He spoke to Jesus, but using his name, Jesus. But for him, obviously, there was somebody in front of him, but not for me. I stayed quiet and didn't say anything, and a few days later he said to me, will you come to church with me? And I'd been there for 2 years in Cancun, whatever, 2.5 years. And I didn't know where the church was. And he'd been there for a week or so and knew where it was. So he took me to the church. And he went in, he went up to the front, I remember, and I knelt down at the back. And I remembered something from when I was a child, where there's a fellow in the gospel who says to Jesus, he says, I don't believe, help me to believe, or I help my unbelief. And that's what I said. And that was just a few seconds. I got up and went out. Certainly didn't want anybody to see me going into a church. But anyway, I went out and he followed me. Brother followed me. And he said, you know, Jesus came down from the altar and stood in front of you. And I said to myself, wow. But again, wouldn't admit anything nor say anything. Now, about a week after that, or 10 days after that, I was sitting in my office, still trying to work things out, nothing happening. I was trying to put projects together, which I'd always been able to do very quickly and easily. Nothing had worked. Nothing was working. It was like as if I was surrounded by a big black cloud, a big wall of blackness. Nothing worked. Everything had always worked out for me. Everything was always smooth and easy, and came when I put my hand to something, it worked out. I was like stymied and blocked at every turn. But I was sitting there in my office and I felt something tuggy at my chest. And it wouldn't go away. Like as if somebody was saying to me, go to confession. I said, oh boy, I don't want to go to confession. But it wouldn't go away. So after about 3 or 4 hours, I said, well, okay. And I said, I went out, crossed the street, crossed another street, because now I knew where the church was. And I just made a pact. I said, look, God, if this is you, I just ask you a favour that is not with any of the Irish priests. So eventually I got to the church, and there was a little house beside it, and knocked on the door, and a man came out with a white shirt and a cross, and I said sort of aggressively to him, I said, are you a priest? He said, yes, I'm a priest. And I said, could you hear my confession? And he said, of course, come in. It's like as if the words came out of me without me wanting them to come out. It was very unusual. And I went into the house and I sat down, and he sat down. He said, so I made a confession. Looking back at it, and over the years, obviously it wasn't the most marvellous confession because there were things I didn't consider even bad. But it was a beginning, and it was sincere. And when we finished, he said, would you like to receive Holy Communion? And he took me into the church, and for the first time, in I don't know how many years, I received the body of Christ. And things didn't get any better. In fact, they got worse. But I began to feel that God did exist and was real, and that Jesus is really present in the Blessed Sacrament. There was a difference. There was a difference. And a few weeks later, I had to go up to Miami. It's just about an hour's flight from Cancun. And I wanted to buy a windsurfer for my son, because he was a lot into sports, and he was an adolescent, and I wanted him to have the opportunity to have a really good windsurfer. He was really getting very good. So I went up there and I'd bought the windsurfer and was going to head back to Cancun the next morning, when I remember my brother had given me a telephone number of a man who lives in Orlando. And it turns out he was a deacon, or is a deacon, a man who wrote a book with Bridge McKenna called Miracles Do Happen. And my brother said, when the next time you go up to Miami or you're up in Florida, give him a call. So I gave him a call. And again, it was feeling like I was doing something that was sort of being led to do, rather than me particularly wanting to do it. So he was very kind on the phone. He said, well, here, what can I do for you? I said, well, can I see you? He said, come on up tomorrow. So the next day I drove up to Orlando and arrived very late for the appointment for different reasons. But anyway, they saw me into his office and he said, what can I do for you? And I said, I don't want to be here. I actually said that, I don't want to be here. I don't really know why I'm here. He said, well, now that you're here, tell me what's going on with you. What's up? So I started telling him about the business and lawyers and things going wrong. My daughter being operated on, marriage on the rocks, running out of money terribly fast, nothing working out. And he said these strange words, may I pray with you? And again, I thought to myself, well, it's not going to hurt me. So he got up and he came around behind me and he put his hands over my head. And again, he prayed like my brother. He believed that Jesus was there in front of him. And I just started crying. And the room filled up with the tremendous warmth and peace. And I filled up with the tremendous warmth and peace that just flowed through my body. Like so real, so amazing. And I just cried. I hadn't cried for years. And cried, and really cried. I had my heart out. And now I realise that, and I did realise too at the time, that God was there. And it didn't matter what mess I'd made of things and all the stuff I'd done. It didn't matter. I realised that I'm his son and a child of his, and that his love was there, embracing me, and that he was interested in my stuff, and that I wasn't alone anymore. And I'd say to anybody that's going through any type of difficult situation, you are not alone. You are not alone. God is with you, and he's interested in the smallest detail. He's the perfect Father. He's the perfect Father. He's really our daddy, but all-powerful. And he can organise things in such a way, an amazing way. And anyway, when I'd finished there with Henry, and he was very kind, and he actually gave me a Bible. Now, I'd never opened the Bible in my life. And he gave me a Bible. And I still use that Bible. It's not exactly the same Bible, but the same edition. And it's become very much part of my life now, the Word of God. It's a pity that we as Catholics tend not to use it, tend not to use the Word of God in our life. So important, so vital. And anyway, I left Henry's office, and by this time it was about 5:30, 6. I was starving, because I hadn't had lunch. And I got this thing in my mind that I'd love a big steak. You know, these American steaks, big giant steak, half a cow sort of thing, and a baked potato, and a big salad. And I said, I have to find a steakhouse. So I was driving along, and I saw a hotel up front. And I had this thing, like somebody was pulling me into the hotel. So in I go. I go into the hotel. And I think I'm going to find the steakhouse there. And I go up to a girl there, and I said, is there a steakhouse here? She said, no. I said, do you know where I can find one? And she gave me a little leaflet with directions of how to get to a steakhouse. So I started driving down this long road, which I remember the name, Orange Blossom Avenue. But Orange Blossom Avenue was full of joints and strip teases and bars. And I said, hey God, what's going on here? Where on earth are you taking me? If this is you, where on earth are you taking me? Because I had this great presence of God around me, and I was actually singing and blessing and praising God. That's something I'd never done in my life. I'd never praised God in my life before. And I'm driving along, and I say, oh boy, where am I going? And eventually, up front, what do I see on the left-hand side but a restaurant, a lovely steakhouse, old English style steakhouse, Disneyland style, but it was a steakhouse. And I said, oh, great. And then on the other side of the road, guess what was there?
Church.
A church. A church. And I said, oh boy, here we go again. And I said, look, God, let's make a deal. I'll go in and have my steak, and after that I'll go across to the church. So I'm sure he must have said fair enough, because anyway I went into the steakhouse, and there's a beautiful waitress. I remember, a very lovely waitress. And she said, would you like an aperitif? And I said, I would. By any chance, do you have Irish whiskey? She said, yeah. Jameson. So good glass of Jameson. A steak that would, at least half a cow. An enormous salad. And a few glasses of wine. A glass of cognac with my apple tart, and a cup of tea or a cup of coffee, whatever it was. So by the time I left the restaurant, I was actually floating. So I floated across to the church in the car. And when I got into the church, it was dark, but there was light under a little door, a side door. So I went through the side door, and there was a group of people, guys and women, people like myself, standing around in a circle praying. And they opened up the circle. I remember they put out their hands, and I was in the circle holding hands with these people. At that moment, they were saying, the just man shall not fear evil news. With a firm heart he will trust in the Lord. And those words were for me. With a firm heart, trust in the Lord. The Lord was like giving me a motto. Never give up. Things may be bad, but he's there. But for heaven's sake, I'd never cried. And in 2 days here, I was crying again. And I forget how long I was there, but I left, didn't say anything to anybody, just got into the car, went back towards Miami, and I was singing and praising God all the way. The next day, I was at the airport, and I see this gorgeous-looking woman, and I said, wow, I think I'll try and chat her up. So when I got onto the plane, she was sitting a few rows back, but there was an empty seat in front. So once the plane had leveled off, I sat down opposite her and tried to speak to her. And she closed a book she was reading, and I saw the book was The Life of Christ. And I said, oh boy. And she said, when you spoke to me, I was reading this sentence. And it was this: if you had the faith like a mustard seed, you would say to this mountain, get up and move into the mountain. So my whole plan changed. I said, okay, Lord, I give up. And even the next day, when I was back, I was driving down the main highway there in Cancun, and a taxi cut in front of me. Now, things in Mexico are in Spanish, but in English it said in the back, my God, I trust in you. That's the beginning of a very long story. Many things have happened after that, Maria.
David, I'm going to have to stop you there. We're all out of time, but it's an amazing story, and we'll talk to you again next week for part 2.
Shine in our hearts, shine through the This program was produced by the Christian Media Trust, exclusively for Southeast Radio.
Southeast Radio.